Are the Minnesota Vikings on the verge of having another superstar player on their roster? This take is presented by Hokelund Farm. Contact Hokelund Farm and get the best rotationally grazed 100% grass-fed beef. This beef is sold in quarters and halves, and he has custom sample packs so you can try before you buy. Contact Hokelund Farms at 952-491-1541 and get 20% off your first order by mentioning the Minnesota Tim podcast. That's 952-491-1541. Okay, so the Minnesota Vikings have finished mandatory OTAs, volunteering OTAs, rookie mini camps, all of these off-season programs that prepare players to get ready for training camp in a couple of months. And there is a particular player that has stood out to the media on the Minnesota Vikings roster. And that player is a wide receiver. And his name is not Justin Jefferson. His name is Jordan Addison. This is what Alec Lewis of The Athletic had to say about Jordan Addison. Addison was one of the standouts at OTAs. He has a talent, like Jefferson, in that he is deceptively fast, peeling out of routes without false steps or a loss of speed. Enhanced knowledge of O'Connell's system should allow him to confound defenses further. He and Jefferson will be on the minds of every opposing defensive coordinator. Another elite NFL source, Albert Breer, had this to say about Jordan Addison. He said, Jordan Addison's growth has created buzz in the Vikings facility. With Jefferson away for most of the season, for the most of the offseason program, Addison's progress really showed up. He came back physically stronger in April while maintaining the burst and body control that made him a first-round pick in 2023. And without Jefferson around, it was easy to visualize how Addison has the ability to be a real number one down the line and create a pick-your-poison problem for teams trying to defend the former USC standout, Jefferson and tight end TJ Hawkinson, all at once. Now, my biggest takeaway from these reports from Albert Breer and Alec Lewis is that Jordan Addison is progressing nicely for the Minnesota Vikings, but even bigger than that is that if Jordan Addison is developing at the rate he's developing, he is going to be another superstar wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings, and that is deeply needed because of a few things. TJ Hawkinson's injury, number one. He ain't going to be healthy for a while next year, and when he's not out there on the football field, that takes away one of the best weapons the Minnesota Vikings have offensively. So having a wide receiver two that's elite, that can run opposite or same side as Justin Jefferson, which should stress out defensive coordinators. Now, I'm going to pump my brakes on calling the Minnesota Vikings offense unstoppable, because I don't think anything's unstoppable. Where was I going with that? I don't know. I'm not going to call the Minnesota Vikings offense unstoppable, but it could be very, very good. And I think with Sam Darnold being the quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings, it's even that much more important that Jordan Addison is going to take that next step as wide receiver. Jordan Addison is going to be the X factor on the Minnesota Vikings offense next year. If he is an elite wide receiver, if he takes that next step, then the Minnesota Vikings offense will be legit, even with Sam Darnold as the quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings, because the defense is going to be taking out Justin Jefferson, number one. They're going to flock 2-3 guys over to his side of the field, which means Jordan Addison will be in one-on-one matchups all over the field. And if he can take advantage of those one-on-one matchups, then that will even open up the field for guys like Aaron Jones. That'll open up the field for guys like Brandon Powell and Jalen Naylor if he's ever healthy enough to play a football game in his entire life. That's going to make it easier on Sam Darnold. That's going to make it easier on every single player offensively if Jordan Addison can become a superstar wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the question that is going to have to be answered eventually down the road is, if Jordan Addison does become this wide receiver, this superstar guy, there's going to be no way the Minnesota Vikings can retain him for the long-term deal with JJ on his big contract, Christian Darrisaw eventually on a big contract, other players getting big deals from the Minnesota Vikings as well. So you need to capitalize on these opportunities on this in this spot where Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson are two of the top 10, top 15 wide receivers in the league. Maybe the best duo in the NFL at the wide receiver position eventually. So there's not a lot of time here for the Minnesota Vikings to capitalize on JJ and Addison being one of the top duos in the NFL, because eventually Addison's going to want to be paid. And the Minnesota Vikings aren't going to be willing or able to pay him the amount of money that he wants to receive. So the Vikings are going to have to trade Addison down the road if he becomes a superstar wide receiver. But that's still a good thing for the Minnesota Vikings, because then they'll get a first round draft pick back in that trade and draft his replacement. But next year, Jordan Addison, his development is going to be essential to the offensive success for the Minnesota Vikings. And just looking at his 2023 stats, he didn't receive for 1,000 yards. He had 911 receiving yards, but he had 10 touchdowns. He had a touchdown in the opening game against Tampa Bay. He had a touchdown in the second game against the Philadelphia Eagles. He had a touchdown in 1, 2, 3, 4. In week 5, week 6, he had 2 touchdowns in week 7, and then he had another touchdown in week 8. So this guy had 7 of his 10 touchdowns in the first 8 weeks of the 2023 NFL season. Jordan Addison has explosiveness in his game, and he has the ability to take the top off the defense with the way he runs his routes and with the explosiveness that he has. So I think all signs are pointing towards Jordan Addison being a superstar for the Minnesota Vikings. And that only means really, 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 really good things for him and for J.J. McCarthy down the road when he becomes the franchise quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be the franchise quarterback, but the franchise is in J.J. McCarthy's hands when he is receiving the keys from Kevin O'Connell and the Minnesota Vikings organization. Thank you for watching this podcast on YouTube. Hit subscribe button right there, rate, review, and follow this podcast wherever you're listening to this podcast. Thank you for listening, and thank you for making this episode a part of your day.